So just a quick intro. My name is Mike Kay. I'm the Director of Technical Operations at Hedera and the Hedera Finos. A quick story of how I got here. So I came to Web3 to build the future of finance after spending more than 15 years in investment banks. I remember the moment clearly when I had my first awakening of the path forward. I was working on the trading floor of Bank of America during the subprime crisis in 2008, and really just trying to keep the trading systems alive, keep the lights on through nothing but a substantial amount of blood, sweat, and tears, and trying to figure out things like our global risk position at the bank, which was basically impossible to figure out because there was just too much fragmentation, too much duplication. It was just too complicated and we couldn't do it. And this is when I first realized that, and to use a slight twist on a very common phrase at that time, that our system was not too big to fail, but it was too big to fix. And it had to be rebuilt from ground up in a new and more efficient way. Now, there are many hurdles and challenges to building this replacement that I speak of. I'm a realist, going to be difficult, going to take a long time, but I can't help but believe that we're on the right path now. And I'm here to tell you about that today. Justin, do you want to do a quick intro of yourself? Get into it.
Yeah, sure. My background is pretty technical. I started out as a software engineer doing just various consulting gigs. I spent the majority of my background as a big data architect and technical lead for Bridgewater hedge fund. I did a lot of the psychological and analytical trading decisions that they made, did a lot of the data storage with that. And that was a really interesting time. And during that kind of stint, I also worked with Edward Jones for a couple of years, doing a lot of their software architecture around big data. And I worked with various other clients, most of which was one large company, active consulting engagements. And then essentially I joined Hedera about 4 years ago as a developer advocate. I loved every second of it and really enjoyed it. And then the opportunity came here recently to come over to the HBAR Foundation as the ecosystem engagement lead, where one of the things you get to really focus on is all of the different use cases rather than being in one special category where like the last 3 years I've been focused on sustainability, which is always a passion of mine personally. I also very interested in where financial data and technical data intersect. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Justin. Okay, welcome everybody to the whirlwind tour of how Hedera, public distributed ledger technology, is trying to change the financial infrastructure that underpins everything we do today. There's a lot to cover. We're going to go broad rather than deep. But if anybody wants to go deeper, please don't hesitate to reach out to me after the call through LinkedIn or email or anything. We are looking to actively engage with Finos members. And even if you're not from a Finos member organization, potentially there is some reason for us to engage anyway. The agenda for today, I'm going to start with a high-level intro into what Hedera is and why I think it might be of interest to you. Then I'm going to cover what I think is our biggest differentiator, our governing council, and how they contribute to the governance of our decentralized ecosystem. I'll then tell you the story of Hiero, our recently launched open source foundation that is a part of the Linux Foundation. And then I'll hand over to Justin, who's going to tell you about a project that he has been working on with Google, who's one of our council members, and all the amazing use cases that this work involves. So that's our plan for today. Let's see if we can get through all of it. So I'm going to quickly cover the real basics. What is a DLT? Simplest explanation I like to use is it's really just a single ledger of transactions with no centralized owner or single points of failure. Think of it like a big Excel spreadsheet of transactions that never stops working, and it's not controlled by a single entity who has any undue influence or power. And those transactions are publicly visible to everyone. Now, there are privacy options for very specific use cases, but generally DLTs are aiming to challenge, or the public DLTs are aiming to challenge the habitual behavior of always defaulting to secrecy in anything that involves a financial transaction. So there are some boundaries that we are trying to push, but you can hide transactions too in many different ways. Another angle to conceptualize what DLTs are providing to the world is They are doing for financial transactions what the internet did for networks. It seems crazy to even think about a world today where the internet would consist of a series of isolated networks coming from each other, perhaps based on country. Global financial systems could benefit from coming a little bit closer to the operating model of the internet, in my opinion. Probably not all the way there, I realize that, but I think the analogy is still a good one. Why do we need this distributed ledger technology? So I realize this question is probably old news in 2025, but it's worth covering it in a 40,000 foot view. The most publicized benefits are security or resilience, no single point of failure, no one single organization owning all of your data as a user. Lower costs. There are many reasons why lower costs can come about through this technology, but less intermediaries is probably the main one. DLTs should provide increased transparency and access for all. DLTs can bring banking to the unbanked, and estimates usually sit around 20 to 25% of the world's population is unbanked. I grew up in a crime-ridden country, and I saw the real effect this had on people, where people had nowhere safe to put their hard-earned money. And in a crime-ridden country, carrying cash is basically putting a target on your back. It's as simple as that. One last benefit, and that's atomic settlement. So this is available by default on blockchains, and that means transactions are settled immediately and they are immutable. There's no risk involved that something might go wrong between the time that you do your transaction and the time to get your T+2 settlement. So that's a very quick description of why DLTs might be interesting to the world now. Let's move on to the Hedera technology. So Hedera is a public permissioned distributed ledger, can also be referred to as a blockchain, and we use proof of stake consensus. Now, Hedera is technically a unique technology called the Hashgraph, rather than a blockchain or a chain of blocks, but that is only how things function underneath. So from a user's perspective, you get all the features of a blockchain and actually a lot more, some of which we'll talk about today. So because it's a more familiar term, we often use blockchain and DLT interchangeably. I also said we are a public permissioned blockchain or DLT. Let me explain what that means. So the public means anybody can use it. Permission means that only permissioned people can operate it. And by operate it, I mean run a validator node. And currently only council members, we'll cover more about our council later, can run validator nodes. And what validator nodes are is simply the distributed set of servers, process and reach consensus of all the transactions occurring on it. So they perform a similar role to mining nodes in Bitcoin. By us being permissioned in this category, we have an improved security posture. And I think you would agree that might be less scared of malicious actors in an environment where all the nodes are run by recognizable companies who have a public brand to protect. They're not run by entirely anonymous entities that exist on the internet. Could be North Korea. Covering the details of the unique Hashgraph consensus algorithm could be a talk on its own. So I've left a link down here in the deck for you to watch if you'd like. That is a 5 minutes TLDR of what our Hashgraph algorithm is. This algorithm was invented by our esteemed founder, Dr. Lehman Baird, and I encourage you to listen to it because if you've read the Bitcoin white paper, I would guess you might have felt similar to myself at the end when you thought, wow, that's so elegant, but also so simple. And I think if you take a few minutes to understand the Hashgraph consensus algorithm, you might have a similar feeling. And perhaps even conclude that this could be the future of the Web3 tech stack. But don't listen to my opinions. Rather, please listen to the video and make your own conclusions. So under the hood, the key differences are between the Hashgraph consensus mechanism and a typical blockchain are that in our case, there are no blocks. There is only gossip. And by gossip, nodes, validator nodes, promiscuously share events of any kind with everybody else, creating a web of data rather than a chain of blocks. After this, every node builds a current view of state by figuring out what everyone agrees on instantly by analyzing that history of gossip transactions. Sounds pretty simple, right? Please watch the video. And if you do watch the video, then you know what to think. Point to the slide is to talk about the three services that make up the core functionality that Hedera provides. What are the types of transactions you can actually run on the Hedera network? So if you look on the screen on the left, consensus service is one of our main services, and this provides you the ability to very rapidly and very cheaply record any textual information on chain. Think of it as an immutable, unchangeable log of data. Second, there is the token service, which allows you to very simply create and distribute your own tokens. You do not need smart contracts. It's incredibly simple, it's fast, and it's cheap to use. It has many useful features built in that you probably haven't seen anywhere else. I don't think any other platform has anything like this. I might be wrong, but I've never seen it. I would encourage even non-developers to have a go at one of our online tutorials to see just how simple it is to create and launch your own token using this service. Third, we have the thing that is probably more familiar to everybody, which is a smart contract service that is EVM compatible. So this will allow you to create more complicated DLT use cases and basically port anything over from any other EVM compatible chain. And you can essentially build any Web3 use case here, whatever you want. A little bit about why Hedera stands apart from other DLTs. So I think one of our most important points is that we have fair ordering of transactions natively. So it may be surprising to know that on Ethereum and most other blockchains, this is not the case. And essentially, I'm referring to a practice where users watch all the transactions as they come in to be processed on the blockchain. And when they see a large market moving transaction, they can simply front run that transaction by paying a higher transaction fee, almost like a tip for the miner to get their transaction put first. So the validator node will then execute their buy transaction before the large market moving transaction, and they get a very risk-free arbitrage. And in financial markets, this is the very definition of front running, and it's illegal. You might go to jail if you do it. On Hedera, all of this is taken out. It's completely impossible. There are two reasons. One is that nobody can influence the order of transactions on the network. There's no action you can do to influence that. Our algorithms doesn't work like that. And the second is that nobody can actually see the transactions until they are live on the network. This likely has other benefits too. What other advantages does our algorithm give us, our Hashgraph algorithm? So we have blazing speed. Transactions finalize in seconds, and we can handle a very high throughput. In fact, we've had transactions per second on our mainnet push above 8,000 without impact. No, this is not a testnet or lab conditions. These are mainnet. This is on our mainnet and it's processing real world client transactions, not test data. And I highlight this because many people like to boost their TPS figures by quoting lab or testnet results. As a further extension to this, if you choose the right 1 year period, you can look at the historical data of Hedera over an entire year. We have averaged more than 1,500 transactions per second, no downtime, which I think is amazing and really shows how reliable our network is and like the battle testing that we've already done. What else is there to say? We have also been independently verified as the greenest blockchain from an operational perspective. There's a slide in the appendix, which you can look at afterwards, which will compare and show you just how much greener we are. But ballpark, we're talking well north of 100x greener than many other well-known chains. And we don't include Bitcoin in that comparison because it's proof of work and I would lose count of the number of zeros we'd have to add. So we instead compare ourselves to the greenest proof of stake that exist. We also have very low transaction fees, but more importantly than low transaction fees, all our transaction fees are priced in US dollars. And again, we are unique in this regard. And what it means is you don't have to take any token volatility risk if you're using our platform. We have a utility token by the name of HBAR that powers our network. But Transaction prices are always priced in US dollars. There's also no surge pricing, another point that might get you into trouble in certain times on other networks. So your transaction pricing will be consistent at all times. Let's talk about security. As far as I've been able to find, we are the only blockchain that has been mathematically certified to have ABFT and ABFT consensus algorithm. And essentially what this means is that it's much harder for malicious actors to attack on it. What's more, our consensus algorithm is also leaderless, which increases our security again, because relative to traditional blockchains, because if there is no leader to attack, attacks just become a lot harder. And last but definitely not least is the topic of quantum resistance, or post-quantum, which is a hot topic nowadays. We are not fully quantum resistant yet, but we are very close. And we are now simply waiting on NIST to define the industry standards around post-quantum algorithms. We already use SHA-384 for everything on our network except for signatures. And SHA-384 is a cryptographic algorithm that is considered quantum resistant. The reason we have non-quantum resistant signatures is mostly for industry familiarity, and also just because the standards have not been set yet in this category. Once they've been set, all we have to do is add a new type of signature algorithm to our platform. We've already done this before. We've already performed this exact same operation. We added ECDSA keys to our network for EVM compatibility. All of these changes are very easy for us because we have separated the concept of accounts and a public key. On Ethereum, where public key is your wallet address, we have a separate wallet or account address, and you can attach to that address any supported key. Rotational keys is something that we designed in from the beginning, and this is, again, very different to West blockchain. I struggle to imagine the complexity that some of them might face in terms of going through their upgrade path in this now. I think that's all to say for that slide. Here are a few of the use cases that are running on Hedera at present. Aberdeen is tokenizing money market funds in order to democratize access and essentially drastically lower the minimum investment amount to gain exposure to a money market fund, as well as massively reduce the operational costs and thus, hopefully, the fees paid to fund managers. Hyundai is tracking supplier carbon emissions, and Karate Combat shows that we have non-enterprise use cases on our platform as well. This is a fun one, and it's essentially a regular full contact mixed martial arts competition, similar to the UFC, but without grappling. And it's held in various locations around the world, usually alongside a very large blockchain event. And the important thing is that the entire competition is gamified on the Hedera platform. It's really worth going to see if you ever get the chance. So, why act now? I'm just going to mention two impactful figures from the slide in the interest of time. First, that 56% of Fortune 500 companies are already moving on this. And second, that Gartner predicts 3.1 trillion as the amount of new blockchain business by 2030. I know many people who would say that this is a conservative estimate too. What has changed in the past few months for DLTs since Trump took the presidency in the US? The short answer is a lot. It is clearly a major goal of the Trump administration to encourage DLT blockchain work back to the US, mostly by providing a clearer and friendlier regulatory environment. Trump has done many things already. He's revoked previous executive orders of Biden's that were not crypto friendly. He has started the process of creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. He has placed crypto friendly people everywhere, especially into new roles like the AI and crypto czar. He's done many things. Once again, there are some very interesting links in the slide if you would like to read them later. As we look towards the next decade, large enterprises have to prepare now to integrate blockchain and DLT into their infrastructure. Here we can see some incredibly influential organizations expressing their intention towards enterprise adoption of DLTs. Clearstream, BlackRock, PwC, Euroclear. I think, in my opinion, it's hard to still support the argument of if DLTs are going to impact us. I think it has clearly reached the when question. So to sum up the super quick intro of Hedera, it is my opinion that in order to maintain your competitive advantage, large financial institutions must begin planning DLT integration now. It's a multi-year process, and DLTs are poised to disrupt significant portions of existing systems. Okay, let's switch on to a related but slightly different topic: the governance of Hedera. So the Hedera Governing Council is unquestionably our most unique differentiator as a public distributed ledger technology blockchain. There are many cool features that I've already explained, but this is our best feature, for sure. So the Governing Council provides the governance over our decentralized network. All important decisions going to this council for approval, not to people like me, unfortunately. Currently, it consists of 30 large organizations, many world leaders in the industry, and there are naturally a number of fintech companies: Google, IBM, Dell, Shinhan Bank, Nomura, Standard Bank, WillPay, Tata, and Wipro. But we also have educational institutions, telcos, energy, Web3 native, consumer electronics, food and beverages, legal, retail, and others. So we take decentralization very seriously. And to that extent, we want our council to reflect a very diverse group of organizations covering many different industries. What does our council do? Firstly, it's important to say that they all have equal voting rights. And the tasks that they do, I will give a number of examples. So they ensure upgrades to the network are made in an appropriate manner and that there are no risk of forks. They ensure that the network is run in a stable and secure manner in general, and they would make any hard decisions if there was a severe security incident where some difficult decision needed to be made by this governing council. They direct our regulatory efforts, promote the adoption of Hedera, and they manage the treasury, deployment of tokens, any changes that need to be made to tokenomics or pricing. And they all operate a validator consensus network, like I explained. Why join the Hedera Governing Council? So now is a good time to highlight that there are still spaces on our Governing Council. And if you think it would be an interesting topic to explore for your organization, please follow up with me after this presentation and we can give you a much deeper dive benefits you might apply. But at a high level, the benefits are that you would get a seat at the governance table to both observe and direct the growth of a very unique layer one that is strongly committed to being the layer one for enterprises. You also have ample opportunity to network and collaborate with our council and in any way fit. And you should have a clear competitive advantage in terms of DLT adoption in your enterprise. Joining should accelerate your readiness. And when you come to building your own use cases, you'll be in a perfect position to make it easier, as you will have at your fingertips all the assistance from the experts and the designers that you could ask. What is required of your organization if you join? What are the costs? There aren't any costs other than your time and attention. So it's very important to mention that there are no fiduciary duties. So you could be guided by the best interests of your company rather than the council as a whole, the Hedera network. You can put your own business interests first, which might be surprising to some. There is no financial exposure required either, and this is by design. So no material equity investment, no capital contribution. There should be no tax implication. Hedera is a not-for-profit. You have no rights to profits, dividends, or any financial gain. The main benefit is your acceleration in this industry and the ability to influence and direct our ecosystem in a way that might benefit your organization. So especially in a situation where you decide you want to run a use case on Hedera, you will have an advantage. These are some of the reasons that other council members have joined us. In the interest of time, I'll leave this with you on reading the deck afterwards. But you can see comments from LG and Shinhan Bank, Dell, and Wonderly. In summary of the Hedera Council, joining can offer many strategic benefits, and collaboration opportunities with both builders in our ecosystem and other council members. Please reach out to me after the webinar through LinkedIn or email if you would like to take this conversation. And now it's time to switch gears, and I can introduce you to Hiero, which is a very important part of the Hedera story. What is Hiero? Hiero is an open source DLT project hosted by the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust. Essentially, the codebase that powers the Hedera network and is the new home of open source development, the Hedera ecosystem as a whole. A critical milestone in the story of Hedera is that we launched Hiero in September of last year and donated all of our code to the Linux Foundation. We were, and I think still are, the only large public blockchain to do this, and signals strongly our intention to achieve open and transparent governance of our codebase. So what code is inside Hiero? Essentially, everything that runs the network layer is either there already or in the process of migration. This includes the Hashgraph consensus algorithm, all the core services, all the tooling, and all the libraries that you might need to build dApps on the Hedera network. Why did we choose the Linux Foundation? I think that answer is straightforward. It's the most tried and trusted foundation there is. We want to leverage the powerful platform the Linux Foundation has put together through iterating continuously for 25 years through their processes. I think this donation of code also reflects our ultimate step towards creating a trustless Hedera ecosystem. So trustlessness is a very well used term in blockchain system design, where you create a system where people don't have to think too much about trust because it's just built into how everything works. And processes of the Linux Foundation ensure that ill-intentioned actors just cannot get their way. So donating our code to the Linux Foundation is something we did to deliver a trustless ecosystem. Why open source? I think you all know the benefits of why open source works. I want to mention what I think are the two biggest benefits to Hiero in a bit more detail. So firstly, by placing the code base under the Linux Foundation, create vendor neutral governance. This means no single entity has exclusive control, fostering a more collaborative and transparent environment. There are companies on this webinar that are over 200 years old. Hiero is our answer to make companies that are thinking extremely long-term feel safe about adopting our technology. The second major benefit of an open source foundation is the community that it brings. So I previously worked for a private permissioned DLT solution. And one of the main reasons I joined Hedera was because for the vision of DLTs to reach their true potential, there's a huge ecosystem of infrastructure and tools that need to be developed to support this brand new technology. If you can't create a community of builders, that means you have to build it all yourself. And that just doesn't scale. You have to create the right incentives for builders to come to you, to build their own businesses that will support your ecosystem. So for Hedera to become widely used, we need very mature wallet solutions, custodial solutions, private key management and recovery solutions, oracles, bridges, you name it. We try to build this all ourselves. We just want to. So in summary, launching Hiero is almost at its core a recognition of how important our developers are to us. We have to be servant leaders to these developers and make an ecosystem they feel welcome in, they are incentivized to participate in, and most importantly, they trust. So one last question about Hiero you might have is on governance and who governs Hiero and how is that different from the Hedera Governing Council? So previously, the Hedera Council governed both the network and the code base. But now the Hedera Council only governs the network, whilst Hiero, project that is part of the Linux Foundation, governs the code base and the roadmap. We've created more decentralization. How is Hiero governed? There is a technical steering committee, a TSC, that consists of 8 seats. It has members of Hashgraph, which is the engineering company who built Hedera originally, including the founder who developed the Hashgraph consensus algorithm, Dr. Lehman Ballard. There's one member from Hedera who represents the Governing Council's interests. And the rest of the seats are open to the most influential builders in our community. There are 2 seats currently held by community members, and there are 2 open seats that are presently being elected through the community. I will include in this deck a link to more details about the selection process if anybody is interested. If you would like to find out more about Hiero, here are some QR codes to get you started. You can get involved in many different ways. The governance calls are public. You run hackathons. You could even run for a seat on the technical steering committee. Please reach out to me if you'd like to discuss any of this further. And we aim to connect also with other open source ecosystems and are not focused solely on Hiero. For example, we are doing a lot of work with the Open Wallet Foundation. And if you think that there is a partnership with your open source ecosystem and ours that makes sense, please reach out to me and we can discuss it. We're ready to discuss that. But that's enough for me. And now I'm going to hand over to Justin Atwell from the Atwell Foundation to talk about use cases.
Right. Hey, everybody. Yeah, let's go ahead and dig right into it. Basically, I wanted to start this out with just giving an overview on Google BigQuery because Hedera being a public DLT, why do we need BigQuery? How do they interact? Things like that. One of the biggest differences is that BigQuery is a fully managed serverless data warehouse. Basically, when you're using it, you're not focusing on infrastructure. And that allows you to focus on really large data sets at a given time. Whereas on the Hedera ecosystem, where we focus on is being able to view transactions, of course, but if you're looking at all of those holistically, then it becomes a challenge. And basically, the way that they do this is the pricing model is based around usage and the processing and storage, of course. So what that gives you is when you're actually executing a query or an analyst, probably more likely, you'll know the cost ahead of time. So you won't necessarily have to worry about how much your server infrastructure is going to cost and all of that stuff. And there's lots of other things about the data ingestion as well. You don't necessarily have to look at all of the data holistically. The easiest time to look at that data is as it's being streamed. So the communication really between Hedera and our mirror node and the Google BigQuery data sets, it's really for a different purpose, although super related. Yeah, next slide. So basically, with blockchain data in Google BigQuery, particularly Hedera, we're integrated into Google BigQuery now. And what that does is if you want to search all of the transactions on Hedera, I take that back. The data is not all the way in Google BigQuery. It's being ingested now. So it does take a little bit of time to catch up. But here soon, as soon as that's finished ingesting, then you can get a lot of really good query insights. You can look at AI capabilities right then and there in BigQuery without having to talk to a third party or having to pay someone else. You also don't really have to worry about storing the Hedera data because Google BigQuery is completely managed. If you want to do your queries repeatedly over Hedera data, then you could do that and the cost would be a lot lower, assuming that's temporary. And then the other really important thing here is that it's not just Hedera data. We want diving into cross blockchain type analysis is really important. You can really tell a lot by looking at the actual data on the blockchain. Particularly, I know Mike was touching on this earlier about some of the transactions and what those transactions are comprised of. It's a big deal and you can actually learn quite a bit. Yeah, I definitely encourage you to check that out. Yeah, next slide. So now we're starting to talk about a lot of the different search capabilities. So Google has plans, just like many of the other cloud providers, to really integrate natural language processing and Web3 AI search in all of their infrastructure supporting needs. With all of these blockchains soon to be, not all of them yet, but Ethereum was the first one added. So you'll see it here in just a minute. But basically, if you want to check balances using natural language commands, that allows you to do that. Using these types of Web3 AI searches, it gives you that power, having a common schema to search, to transfer data, to perform token transfers, any of those type of things with natural language interactions rather than having to have a programmer do it. And that abstraction is really huge and it enables organizations really to focus less on tech and more about the blockchain and about what fit is right for them as an organization. All right, next. So yeah, this is just an example. Hedera is not offered here. So I had not offered here yet. So I had to show an example of one that's not Hedera. But you can see here where things are moving a lot more beyond just the data sets. Google and mostly Google, I think. I'm not sure about Amazon, but Google's very interested in getting into blockchain, as evidenced by them being on our council, of course. But you can see here faucets and all the other tools that help you around Web3, whether it be like our SDKs on Hedera or whether it be Web3 JS for Ethereum. All of these different tools and all of these different blockchains require different tools and they don't necessarily work together. So it's a great idea to have someone like Google who can bridge that gap and have a common data schema to allow that inter-blockchain capability. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk about ecological projects and traceability just for a minute. So basically, BigQuery facilitates analysis of methodologies across any blockchain. So one of the things that you see a lot in the carbon industry, sustainability industry, and probably emissions industry as well, although it's less measured, you have lots of carbon offsets that are created, and it's very difficult in some of those legacy carbon offset ways to verify that there's no double spend, no shady accounting being done, and things like that. With a lot of these projects that are moving onto blockchains, who's there to ensure that this carbon offset's only released on one blockchain? And there's this concept of mercenaries where they go and they'll go blockchain to blockchain on some use cases, maybe not sustainability, but lots of NFT projects and things like that. There, you want to make sure that everything is unique, especially in sustainability. So what I did here is I just grabbed a quick screenshot of a recent project that was live on Dovu. They do a lot of sustainability stuff and supply chain stuff. And so you can see on the statistics part there, where you're looking at the ton sequester, the documents, all the audit trail stuff, the supply, all of that stuff, we're hoping we know that on Hedera at least, but we don't ever want those to be tokenized somewhere else because we want the accounting of what the carbon offset represents to be accurate. We really want to know how everything is doing as well. And how this ties into Google BigQuery is all of those statistics. So from a fraud standpoint, making sure that asset's double counted. If the blockchain's data is hosted in Google BigQuery, you could potentially use AI to query that and see if that geographical area where the carbon offset is, whether it pops up on any other blockchain. And those type of capabilities are something that is just absolutely outstanding, in my opinion, to do all of that and then not even worry about how much hardware you have to stand up. It's just absolutely amazing to me. All right, next slide. Yeah, I wanted to talk really quick about a couple of sample use cases. These are not necessarily on Hedera. They might be, they might not be. I just wanted to have a really good template to make sure that we talked about Google BigQuery. So if we're looking at something potentially like gold futures, silver futures, really any commodity future, they're very regulated. And so really you don't want to be the only one releasing something. You want to have folks where you can look at some of that data specifically. Gold futures has been commoditized numerous different times. So that's not something that you would have to reinvent the rules for on Web3. You simply tokenize them. What you'd want to do is you would want to look at other blockchains before really picking which blockchain you want. For instance, using Google BigQuery, you could look at Hedera's data and search for gold futures, commodity derivatives, or any of those type of things. But you can also look across all the blockchains who put their data on the Google BigQuery Pell data set. If we ever want to dive into the how of why Hedera is better to commoditize those, I would love to do that as well. That's actually my specialty is use cases. I really enjoy it. But talking deeper into the data sets, you don't really want to worry about all the overhead of setting up a whole team that knows how to look at the data. You want to spend your time actually looking at details that are relevant, like the trading volume, how it's settled, the regulatory stuff, all those things that are important to you. And yeah, go to the next one. So this anti-money laundering is really important to me, mostly because of sustainability and that sort of thing. I just think it's a fascinating use case of blockchain, but it exists in significantly more areas. Basically, with financial institutions, they have to prevent money laundering, terrorist financing, all those other bad things. That's going to that seeps into crypto as well in all the different ways. And so a lot of the stuff that we've done over the years is things like identity verification. We follow compliant W3C DID specifications, which are widely used all around the world. And so we didn't reinvent that wheel to handle decentralized identity. So what that allows you to do is, you know, the process exists, so you can use it on our blockchain without really worrying if it exists. And then the beauty of that is for all of those decentralized identifiers that's been created, the BigQuery part of that is being able to look at that. being able to aggregate that data and really analyze it, not analyzing the infrastructure, analyzing the actual data that's being queried. And that's the BigQuery part of that. And then there's also lots of the piece about that of the streaming data is a big point. I don't have time to get too deep into it, but looking at the data as the data comes through. If you have coins, stable coins or something like that with highly specific attributes, or you had gold futures or really just anything, even if you have flagged users that you want to flag their transactions, that becomes very easy with a system like Google BigQuery because it allows you to add your analytics on top of it, on top of the Hedera infrastructure using your cloud's hardware that you already have. And when you actually need action on that data, you're able to do. I believe that is all I had. 2 minutes early.
Big timing. So yeah, we've moved up to questions now. Cole, do you want to tell people how to ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone should have access to the Zoom chat or the Zoom Q&A bar. So if you can please put in any questions there in the meantime. Let's see, we have a couple questions here. So if you could change one thing about Web3 to make adoption easier, what would it be, do you think?
I think we can probably both answer that. I'll give my answer. I'm going to give you two answers though, I think. So one of the main problems with Web3 adoption, I think, is all the people trying to scam other people. So whatever you could do around that, and then I don't know what else there is. And there's many things you can do, but stricter enforcement on people who've clearly done something illegal, targeting actual people, I think that would do a lot to help with the adoption. The second thing is I actually had this included in the presentation today, but there's time I had to remove it. So we need a solution to solve private key management. Nobody wants to manage their own private key, especially when it has to protect their house or all their assets. I don't want to manage private key. There are ways to solve this problem. We've actually set up something called the DREC Alliance, Decentralized Recovery Alliance. I was going to talk about it today. Very high level. It's a partnership between ourselves, Cardano, Algorand, and Ripple. And we are trying to make a standard for how you can solve this problem through many different mechanisms, which I won't go into now. We could do a separate session on. That's two. Sorry, it was two, not one. Justin, do you want to give your answer?
Yeah, I think the UX in Web3 is just missing in a lot of ways. It's actually, believe it or not, one of the first reasons that brought me to Hedera was I was looking at a lot of other blockchain. At the time, it was Ethereum. Granted, Ethereum and MetaMask have come a long way, and they're wonderful products now. But I was wondering, why does this take so long to do this? And me as a programmer, trying to interface with the blockchain and see data that's emitted after it goes through smart contracts and things like that. It's difficult. It's still difficult using a lot of chains. And I think with Hedera, when you're looking at that data and you're reading data that's gone through consensus, it's so easy on our blockchain to do that because if you've developed in Java or JavaScript, any previous life or current life, you already know how to do all of that stuff on Hedera. That makes the learning curve to learn Hedera significantly easier to learn Hedera. And so like if you look at the UX on Hedera and you look at the UX on significant and a lot of the other blockchains, you'll see that our UXs are all much snappier. Saucer Swap is the fastest DEX in town right now, probably ever, but they do that because our blockchain's fast and it enables a lot of UX experiences that you really can't get away with as easy on some similar other blockchains. That's a long answer, sorry.
Oh, that was great. And well, I also just think something that to highlight something that you said, I think Mike said earlier in the presentation, just the ability to interact in with trusted node operators that who the node operators are, like on the Hedera side, that certainly is one of the ways to build scam avoidance mechanisms.
Especially
and be able
because
to
they all meet.
Yeah, and trusted counterparties.
Yeah.
But okay, so we got a question here in the Q&A box. How do you see the intersection of DLT and open finance?
It's a tough one. I think we still believe it. So I don't think I know the answer to that yet. But all I know is that, and as I described today, is that DLTs need to be built in an open source manner or they won't succeed. There's simply too much that needs to be replaced. And if we can't find a way to build this in an open source manner, it's not going to work. It's mandatory. And I think that is really my only answer. Justin, do you have anything to add?
Think a lot of it's a very interesting thing because if you look at most blockchains, it's like Mike said earlier, it's like an Excel spreadsheet that's never ending, right? And I think that one of the coolest things that people can do is start thinking about ways to store data public and then ways to store data private. So there's a set of data that in finance, maybe all of my customers, you wouldn't want to ever leak your customers' names because that would sound terrible. That's awful. That's a leak of PII. That's GDPR compliance nightmare and all the things we don't want to see, right? But there are things that you do want to have to show to the public. And a lot of that is regulatory stuff. I know with emissions, with a lot of supply chain stuff, it's really coming down to provenance. So if you have an ingredient of a little battery cube that I have here, is something in there mined by somebody in some country where they had to do it for free and there's all this bad stuff going on. The details about products, I think, where those are being sourced, those are really great use cases for public DLT. And then other things too, where I like to look and from a finance standpoint of where sourcing like gold contracts, what's it tracking, what's the inventory, looking at pretty much any real world asset that has anything to do with finance. And there's lots of details that you can't expose, but there's lots of stuff you want to expose because you can potentially earn more money from it. People will pay more knowing that the diamonds that they're buying are not blood diamonds, that sort of thing.
You're on mute.
I am on mute. We have another question here from Richard Roy. One of the biggest challenges with blockchain adoption is complexity. What comments would you make about complexity on Hedera, Hiero, or use of the EVM compatibility of Hiero?
Do you want to take this one, Justin?
Yeah, I'll take this one. A lot of the integrations and complexities for that matter, they're there with Web3. There's a base amount of complexity. I think where things with Hedera are a lot easier is accounting based finance on the ledger. A lot of the stuff, UTXO models that Cardano and some of the others use, where the model of how the transactions happen are done in a way that's just inherently confusing because it's not the way things work today. Hedera uses an accounting based model, and that is like a really big deal because it's a lot easier for everyone else to understand. And there's something else too that pops into my mind, and that is custom fees. A lot of the times, these tokens, they have to transfer. And when you're looking at some of the EVM stuff, and even our EVM, because we're EVM compatible, the smart contract code that is inside the EVM is nebulous until it's verified. And there's just all these steps that can be done on the EVM. With Hedera, it's not so much as about how you do things on the blockchain. It's more about what you store because large financial organizations, they don't need us to tell them how to perform their logic. Lots of books they do want that, and they do want that decentralization. And that's great. You can put those in smart contracts in Ethereum, or you can open source a repo, but we don't want to require the steps of your financial transactions to be a certain way on Hedera. We want to focus on the what. I think I would challenge, if you take a look at Hedera and then look at a lot of the other ones, it's significantly easier. Yeah, it's more Web 2.5 than Web 3 in some ways. It really is.
Just to add to that, I want to repeat what I said earlier. I really would encourage you to try a tutorial to see just how easy it is to do anything with Hedera. I'm not saying that it's easy to replace a legacy technical infrastructure that you might be faced with, but like the blockchain on Hedera part is truly simple. The harder part is figuring out how it integrates with your structure or things you have to change.
Yeah, how do you make a mainframe communicate with the DLT? That is way, way harder than using Hedera.
Quick question from me. So does some of the efficiency and like more sustainability come from the fact that it's a hash graph compared to a traditional chain of blocks, or the fact that it is managed as accounts? Like, does the managed serviceness of that like lead to a lower cost in like transaction and such? Or where architecturally does that kind of come from?
It's not an area that I'm an expert in. I'll hand over to Justin. But one thing I want to say is that the fact that we have only the world with 30 validator nodes, commission network of 30 validator nodes. That adds to the greenery of our solution. And we were happy that's enough. It's a large enough number to provide the resilience that you need for a decentralized network. One thing I can say, if you look through, I think I included some of the slides, like our validator network is dispersed across so many different locations. We have more geographic distribution than I think anybody else could possibly have. So
Yeah.
I think we've managed to achieve decentralize it, like the benefits of decentralization without having too many nodes. But then in terms of the actual computing that's happening under the hood, Justin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a few different reasons why we're stay fast and are fast. So our network is broken into two pieces. We have our consensus network, which is where transactions are processed, the fair ordering, all the magic happens there. And then afterwards, after 90 seconds, I believe, those transactions are moved off to the mirror network, so at that point, what you're doing is you're maintaining the fast speed on the consensus layer there. And then on the mirror network, it's still verifying the same way, but it's historical data. So it's not as important. A lot of the other, there's a few other reasons too. Gossip about gossip as a protocol is mathematically very efficient. There's a lot of nuts and bolts here, but the beauty of it is that with Hedera, you're not necessarily just sending each transaction to every node. You're doing gossip about gossip, which is you're talking about the history of the blockchain to the nodes. And we use that. And there are lots of in-depth things like Merkle trees and how those are very fast, but I would probably butcher that one too. So
As someone who wrote his thesis in passing messages through graphs, I could ask questions about this for hours and I would bore everyone, and we are at time. We have an answer from Alexander in the chat. The Hashgraph's network's greenness is largely driven by the efficiency of the Hashgraph algorithm, requiring much less data to be processed and transferred. So that makes a lot of sense. Cool. So we are at time. Excellent chat. A topic I'm very interested in and glad to see addressing this audience on this topic. I hope that this spurs some more interest and participation among our membership. That would be very exciting to see. As a reminder to everyone on this call, this is the Open Source in Finance webinar series. This is a member benefit. So if you liked what you saw today and also would like your member firm to deliver a similar webinar, please reach out to the Finos team and we will be more than happy to chat about getting you onto our calendar series. With that, a big thank you to Mike and Justin for a great and informative webinar today. With that, thank you to everyone who has stayed through, to all the attendees.